So a few years ago, I went to the Tattered Cover bookstore, and I bought this notebook. And it was one of the scariest and hardest things I've ever done, because I knew what was going inside of this notebook. In the pages of this notebook, I began a process of writing all my anger, all the things, all the principles, all the institutions that caused resentment inside of me. And the guy I was working with, the guy who encouraged me to do this, he said, "Now, Ryan, it's going to be really important that you get it all out, that you don't hold back. Don't hold anything back. Get it out. This is your opportunity." And so at the top of each page, I started with this simple prayer. God, help me to be thorough and honest. 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 You see, I had to start with this prayer because my impulse said the exact opposite. "Oh, Ryan, don't be too thorough. You don't really want to get it all out there. Really, you feel anger towards that? Such a small thing." See, I was really good at listening to my life, but with all sorts of judgment. "Oh, you're angry towards him for doing that? Ryan, maybe you're blowing this out of proportion. Don't be too honest. When we don't get it all out, what if God actually judges some of this honesty?" It was hard work. I read through this notebook again this week. I hadn't read it for a while. Again this week, I was reading through it as I was thinking about this sermon. On the second page, on the back of the second page, I don't remember writing this, but it's there, so I clearly felt it. I wrote on the back of the second page, "I feel tremendously guilty for writing some of this." One of my biggest fears was, and I remember thinking this one evening while writing, what if I die tonight? Like, what if I die tonight and this notebook is what I leave behind? And what if people actually read it? What are they going to think? Boy, that Ryan, he was angry. Man, I hope he was seeing someone for this stuff. Serious business. Pastor Ryan? Can he say those things? Can he use those words in that language? See, and as I was going through this notebook, I saw that I was in some good company. Biblically speaking, I was in good company. Because about the same time, a few years ago, I came across a psalm. It's a psalm I've read before, but you know how you can read something and not really read it? And this time I really read it and it resonated. Actually, this psalm, Psalm 137, it's a psalm that John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, said should never be read in a worship service inside the doors of a church. Doesn't that make you want to read it? So we're not actually going to read it, but I will kind of rehash the story for you. This psalmist is angry, really angry. He and his people have just been taken into exile where they're living in this foreign land. Because the Babylonians came in to his land, destroyed it, ransacked it, took some of their women and raped them, took some of their children and had them killed. And this psalmist begins to cry out to God. God, remember them and what they did to us on this day. And he goes on. God, give a blessing to all those who take the children of the Babylonians and bash them against the rock. Oh my goodness. Can he say that? This is our sacred scriptures. Can he say that? Can he use those words? Can he use that language? And at the same time, there's just something kind of beautiful about it. There is something beautiful about someone who is brave enough Someone who is honest enough to deal with the interiors, to deal with what's going on inside. There's something beautiful about someone who trusts God enough with this kind of anger. And so as I was going through my notebook, for me, this became a beautiful saving act of prayer, where I could get it out. I could be honest with the interior. Rob Bell, he's one of my favorite theologians and communicators and authors. He says this about prayer. Prayer is ripping open your rib cage so that your heart can breathe. When I began this process of writing in this notebook, it was the sacred act of prayer for me. The act of ripping open my rib cage so that my heart could breathe again. Speaking of prayer, here's what we'll do. We're going to do two scriptures. We're going to start with the Old Testament prophet Jeremiah, where he gives us another really beautiful, honest prayer. And then we'll turn things over to Jesus and look at this really weird and cool story about Jesus cursing a fig tree. So first, Jeremiah's prayer. Jeremiah is angry. And here's kind of the backstory to why Jeremiah is so angry. His story goes all the way back. This is the story he would have emerged out of. So all the way back to Genesis. Abraham. Remember when God came to Abraham and said, look, your thing is going to be you and the generations after you. You are going to be a people, a tribe that blesses other people, blesses other tribes, all the other nations. Like, this is your thing in life, to bless other people. You're no longer just a tribe for yourself. You will go to others and love them and bless them. Now, fast forward to Jeremiah's time. By Jeremiah's time, things went awry. The people built a temple to their God using slave labor. They were exploiting the poor, using their positions of power to get more power and more wealth. The high priest, so you can think of the high priest as kind of the manager of the temple. He was also the one who was supposed to preserve this beautiful story of being a tribe, a nation, a people that blesses other nations. But this wasn't the case. He was taking the temple taxes. The temple taxes were supposed to be distributed to the poor and the needy in their midst. He was taking the temple taxes and keeping them for himself so that he could gain more wealth. Things got so bad by Jeremiah's day, the people were actually taking their children and offering them as child sacrifices to other gods. So prophets come along and they speak against these abuses of power. Prophets like Jeremiah come along and say, we can't keep going down this road. We're actually becoming weaker, and our neighbors, the Babylonians, the great superpower of the day, they're going to step in and crush us if we don't change. And by the way, we can't keep offering our children as sacrifices. How long will God let this go on? So the high priest has Jeremiah beaten, put in stocks, and publicly humiliated. So Jeremiah begins to pray. Chapter 20, verse 7. Lord, you enticed me, and I was taken in. You were too strong for me, and you prevailed. Now I'm laughed at all the time. Everyone mocks me. Every time I open my mouth, I cry out and say, violence and destruction. The Lord's word has brought me nothing but insult and injury constantly. So I thought, I'll forget him. I'll no longer speak in his name. Jeremiah is angry, right? And you can understand why Jeremiah is so angry. God, all I told him was, we can't keep going down this road. All I told him was, we can't keep sacrificing children to the god of Molech. Fair warning, we're skipping ahead just a couple of verses and things get really weird. Jeremiah takes a major turn. And Jeremiah's prayer is all over the place. It's kind of what makes it beautiful. Verse 13, major turn. But sing to the Lord, praise the Lord, for he has rescued the needy from the clutches of evildoers. Jeremiah, how'd you get there? You were just saying this thing about God, and 3 verses later, 4 verses later, you're saying this thing. How did you get there? Now, before we pass too much criticism and judgment on Jeremiah, think about your own life. Think about how anger might have functioned for you. Have you ever been so hurt by someone, or a group of people, or an institution, or principles? Ever been so hurt, so wounded, so betrayed? And then in the very next moment, you say to yourself, oh, but I'm not going to let this thing get me down. I'm going to take the high road here. I'm going to be better than them. This thing isn't going to drag me down. Life is good. God is good. Sing praises to the Lord. And then in the next moment, the anger creeps back up and you don't know how you got there. Very next verse, verse 14. Cursed be the day that I was born. May the day my mother gave birth to me not be blessed. Skipping to the end of the prayer, verse 18. Why was I ever born when all I see is suffering and misery and my days are filled with shame? He's angry. And don't you get the sense that his anger is mixed in with a bit of grief and loss? Like, God, what happened to my people? This isn't the story we were given. This isn't what we were called into. How did we go from there to here? Have you ever felt like this? Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Have you ever been wounded like this? Maybe it was individuals, or maybe it was a group of people. Maybe you were part of a group where you know you started as this thing, and you were all about it. You were gung-ho for this thing. And some years went by, and you thought, how did this happen? How did we get here? How do we start here and then end up here? You got some anger? Get it out. Get it out. Deal with it. Put words to it. Name it. Give it a language. Get a notebook if you have to. Get it out. Find a closed-mouthed friend, someone that you trust, and go through the anger with someone. Journey with someone. Get muddy. Get dirty with someone. Don't let the anger just churn down in the depths, because it never, ever, ever produces anything good. In fact, in my experience, when you let it just churn down in the depths, it causes spiritual disease. And you can't really see yourself or God or the world accurately. You see those things with a distorted view. And you begin with all the wrong assumptions. Well, maybe this is just the way life is. Little old me, I can't change anything. So I'm just going to protect me and my own. I'll just focus on myself again. Get it out. And I love how the prayer ends. Cursed be the day that I was born. Why was I ever born? All I see is suffering and misery. My days are filled with shame. You see how the prayer doesn't end with this resolved anger? It ends completely unresolved. Kind of makes you uncomfortable, doesn't it? Because I think sometimes as Christians, if we're honest, we like our prayers to be wrapped up with nice, neat, pretty bows. Oh, sure, we could say, oh, life is hard. This thing is so dreadful right now. Oh, but God is good and God's going to see me through. Jeremiah doesn't do that. See, I don't want to resolve the anger, but I do want to push it, and I do want to ask it questions. I think it's good for us to ask of anger, where are you leading me? Are you leading me to a healthy place or to an unhealthy place? Where are you leading me? Anger led Jesus to start cursing fig trees. It is one of the weirdest and coolest stories in the Gospels. We're going to read it because it's short. Here's how it goes. Matthew chapter 21. Early in the morning, as Jesus was returning to the city, he was hungry. He saw a fig tree along the road, but when he came to it, he found nothing except leaves. Then he said to it, "You'll never again bear fruit." The fig tree dried up at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed. The end. That's kind of weird, right? I mean, on the face of it, if we do just no contextual work here, on the face of it, Jesus wakes up, he's hungry and grumpy. He's walking into Jerusalem with his disciples, and he sees a fig tree on the side of the road, and he walks up to the fig tree, and he sees that it only has leaves on it. So he curses it. Jesus, you're looking a little angry here. Now, let's put some context to it. In the first century Jewish world, the world of Jesus, remember Jesus is a first century Jew. In the first century Jewish world, the fig tree symbolized religious leadership and authority. The fig tree was the symbol of religious establishment. Jesus is walking into Jerusalem, and the first thing he does is curse the fig tree. Can you imagine if you're one of Jesus' disciples and you're with him? Oh my goodness. Peter, did you see that? Jesus just cursed the fig tree. I hope no one's watching. This is going to get him killed. Jesus is going to get himself killed doing this kind of stuff. Why is this important? It's a huge heads up in the story, because what happens next? Jesus is continuing walking into Jerusalem, and he goes right to the center of the city. What's at the center of the city? The temple. Jesus shares a lot of anger with Jeremiah. So remember Jeremiah as we rehash the story. Jesus walks into the temple, and he starts driving out those who are selling doves. Why would he drive out people selling doves? Well, if you go into the temple and you want to make an animal sacrifice, you'd have to buy a dove. Keep in mind, keep the people in their day and in their time. Don't try to bring them in our day. Yes, it might sound weird to us. But if they wanted to make a sacrifice, they'd have to buy a dove. Well, in order to buy a dove, you had to take your regular everyday money and go to the money changers and exchange them for temple shekels. You could only spend temple shekels in the temple. And it just so happens, if you're a money changer, you would skyrocket the exchange rate. So Jesus drives them out. Then he goes to the money changers, and he turns over the tables. And he says, "You all have made my house, which is a house of prayer, you've made it into a den of robbers. You all are taking advantage of people. You're exploiting the poor. You're keeping the poor out." Now, you want to see Jesus angry? He is absolutely relentless in his anger when it comes to people keeping other people from experiencing God. And Jesus wasn't just arguing for reform here. Jesus was saying the whole system is corrupt. The whole system needs to change. Jesus was angry. And a story can ask us some really interesting questions. Like, what are some of the fig trees in your life? What are some of the fig trees in your world that need some cursing? Some of the things that need some changing. And what makes you angry? What are the things that make you angry? When you see this thing, it just makes you angry. You can't believe this thing is happening. You can't believe this thing has happened. I want to go back to Jeremiah for just one quick moment. Right after Jeremiah and his prayer, right after he says, "God, your word, it brings me nothing but insult and injury. In fact, I'm going to forget you. I'm not even going to speak in your name anymore." He says this, verse 9. "But there's an intense fire in my heart, trapped in my bones. I'm drained, trying to contain it. I'm unable to do it. Don't you get the sense that Jeremiah, he's done with this prophetic stuff. He's done being a prophet. God, I don't want to be a prophet anymore. The people, they don't even listen to me. I get beaten for it. It's going to get me killed. But there's an intense fire in my heart, trapped in my bones. It's almost like Jeremiah is saying, the only thing worse than doing this would be not to do it. It's who I am. It's trapped in my bones. What are the things that make you want to go to the center of it all and start turning over the tables? It might be the thing that terrifies you. It might be the thing that when you think about it, it makes your hands all sweaty, makes your stomach kind of turn upside down. But you know the only thing worse than doing this thing would be not to do it. What is that thing for you? Or as the author Elizabeth Gilbert puts it, what are the things that make you come alive? What makes you come alive? Stop asking, what does the world need? Ask, what are the things that make me come alive? Because that's what the world needs from you. The world needs more people who are more aware and more awake and more alive. Not people who are walking around with spiritual disease, with all kinds of resentments, and all kinds of dishonesty about what's going on in here. We need people whose souls are alive. So you got some anger? Some stuff you haven't dealt with? Deal with it. Put words to it. Name it. Get it out. Join the tradition of the Psalms and the prophets and be brutally honest with God about what's happening in here. God can handle your anger. And when you do this, your life will be different. Doesn't necessarily mean your life will be easier. But in my experience, your life will be way better, way more meaningful, way deeper relationships. So it's only the third week in January. We can still ask the questions, what will this year look like? Let's ask them together. This year, what are the few things? You can't do it all. You can't give yourself to everything. That'll cause burnout and all sorts of mess. But what are the few things you're going to give yourself to? And what are the things you're going to pour your energy into? And what's the thing that's trapped down in your bones? The thing that you know you have to do because it's who you are. It's what you were created to do. And what are the things that make your soul come alive?